Hi, friends. I'm going to tell you a scary story today. I'm Janelle Orsi, and I'm a finance lawyer, I guess. I'm also a social justice lawyer. And for the last 15 years or so, I've been trying to figure out how those two things make sense together. I think I've come to the conclusion that they don't. But it kind of took me waking up from a bit of a nightmare to realize that. So I'm going to tell you how I kind of searched through the realm of financial regulation, only to realize there's nothing good here. There's no justice to be found here. But it takes some explaining because a lot of people don't realize it until they've kind of been through it. About 6 years ago, I gave a presentation with a bunch of cartoons featuring a cartoon of myself falling off of a chair because to illustrate just how overwhelmed I was. I was just trying to illustrate the point of like how overwhelming our financial system and financial regulations are. But I ended it on such a hopeful note. I was like, we can change these laws. We could find those leverage points. We can build together. Oh my God, I was so cheerful and optimistic. I mean, you could watch it. It's an informative presentation, but beware. The conclusion I come to, the one with all the optimism, not a good conclusion. So the dream of the organization I co-founded, Sustainable Economies Law Center, and my work as a lawyer for co-ops and such, is to build this economy full of cooperatives and local enterprises. And part of that has always been, well, how do we get the money to start those things? And that's how I accidentally became a finance lawyer. You got to learn a lot about the law to know how to be able to move money. And so this was the dream, to finance all these things. And in our wildest dreams, I heard people start to talk about this like 15 years ago, folks like Michael Schuman and Jenny Casson, who ended up co-founding Sustainable Economies Law Center with me about 12 and a half years ago. We thought, what if we just build a whole market for local investment, and we maybe have like local stock exchanges and mutual funds and all that? What if, and people are still asking this today. I've been asked this in the last week. How can we just make it as easy for people to just like move their investments out of the normal Wall Street stuff, the S&P 500, and just make it as easy as clicking a different option that helps send that money to good things in our local communities? This wildest dream, it's not possible, but we really had to go through some nightmarish work to understand that that's the case. And so another way I can describe what the work has been like is that we were very optimistic because there's this huge realm of financial regulation. There's all different kinds of structures you could imagine to channel money to local enterprises. And as a lawyer, being a lawyer is kind of like being a puzzle solver or a hacker or something. And it's fun because you learn about the laws and then you try to figure out how to hack them or whatever. And it's like going through a maze, except we were going through year after year, trying new things, learning new things, hitting a wall and saying, oh well, that one doesn't work. Either it's too burdensome, too costly, or just plain impossible. And then so onward we go in the maze. And then we hit another wall and we're like, oh, here we go again. Well, that wasn't going to work. So back to the drawing board. So we hit wall. At some point, you realize, oh, what if there just isn't a way out of the maze? What if the legal system is actually designed to make sure there's not a way? So that's kind of the question I started to ask a couple of years ago. And it really shook my world. It pulled the rug out from a lot of the work that I've been doing. It really means like for the last couple of years, I've been looking back at the work we've been doing and I've been doing and realizing it's kind of bullshit, because I would show up and be like, imagine this thing that we could build that would channel that capital. And I was so optimistic. I thought it was just around the corner. And now I don't believe that. And it kind of takes some levity and some forgiveness to realize, well, it made sense that I thought that at the time. So like no judgment on myself really, but yeah, self-forgiveness, that's what it's going to take. And so speaking of levity, here's some scenes from my favorite TV show, Bob's Burgers. So in Bob's Burgers, there's a theme park and they're going to have Shark Week, and they bring in this big mechanical shark that's going to be like the attraction of the week. But that big machine starts to go rogue. It flops over and starts flopping through the town, and it's destroying everything. And the people in the town come together. At some point they realize, we got to destroy this thing. We got to bury it. They dig a hole, they try to bury it. But then the shark like burrows in underneath the Bob's Burgers diner and then comes up through the floor, and it's like, the machine, it's out of control. So this is a bit of a metaphor for how I relate to financial regulation, which is, I was the character Tina for a while, and Tina's like, well, the shark is just misunderstood. We can befriend it. And that's what I thought about financial regulation and securities laws, is that we just need to understand it. We can befriend it. We can use it just like anybody else can. Now I'm more like, no, we need to kill the machine. A lot of the work we thought we could do, can't do it. Just, well, spoiler alert, at the end of the episode, they managed to kill the shark by filling it with soft serve ice cream. So in the spirit of keeping things light, that's more or less what I feel like I want to do with a lot of the work that I've done over the years, sort of kill it with ice cream. But, just to illustrate how optimistic I was that we could make friends with this machine. We used to teach securities law workshops, and I would draw these cartoons. I mean, cute cartoons featuring cute squirrels, just because I wanted to bring all of this down to earth, so everyday people could be like, oh, that makes sense. We can navigate this. So you can come and watch. I mean, all of this is still informative, but it's misleading in the sense that it might imply that there's transformation possible here. Social transformation. I don't think that's possible. So I even taught a series of workshops on securities offering documents and how we could really break them down and use graphics to make sense of them. And I did it with this really wistful tone, in the sense of like, well, what are these offering documents about? They're about disclosure. What is disclosure about? Oh, it's about transparency. Transparency is good, right? What a beautiful thing that securities law helps us to be transparent. I don't know. I was just so into it all. And I mean, Sustainable Economies Law Center, we've been working all over the ecosystem. And at one point I kind of mapped out a lot of the work we were doing. And here's our goal: building infinitely diverse, densely participatory, stewardship-oriented local enterprises and land projects. It's beautiful, just like that vision. And then we thought, well, okay, how are we going to resource those things? It felt like we needed a critical mass of organizations, institutions that could channel funding to those things. East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, EBPRAC, was one such thing that we helped to create. And then we work at different parts of what we call the ecosystem of trying to unlock capital. I could explain more of each of these things later, but unlocking the pools of funds, setting up the entities that can receive and then deploy, i.e. invest in the community with those funds. And then within those entities, like really setting them up for resilience, making sure they have the capacity to do all the compliance work and so on, and also don't get corrupted over time. So there's a lot of internal work that we did with organizations. And then externally, I guess that's broader ecosystem work of making sure that these organizations aren't outcompeted in the market, that they're able to gain some advantages, and so on. So we were just sort of like working all over different parts of it, because we knew all these things had to come together to make this possible. And over the years, there's just been no shortage of really amazing, beautiful people, brilliant, many of them well-resourced, very, 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 very motivated people who come together to build this ecosystem together. And I've learned so much from them. There's these conferences, similarly named, there's the ComCap conferences that were happening for a while, the CoCap, i.e. like community capital. And so you would think with all these really brilliant people working on the ecosystem, we would figure this out together. But one thing about this whole ecosystem is, at some point I realized, are we building an ecosystem? What's an ecosystem? Hey trees, what's an ecosystem? Or are we building a machine, like a Rube Goldberg style machine with all these different parts that necessarily have to come together and interlocked in just the right way so that that money can get to where it needs to go and come back and so on? it really felt more, I realized it's really much more like machines that we're building, not ecosystems. And over the years, this is a metaphor that came up again and again, because, we're talking about money flowing, so water comes to mind. But then we thought, well, if we just build the pipes and the pools and the reservoirs, and we can create this whole system that unlocks that money to flow and get it to where it needs to go, but also make sure there's the channels to get it back to the people who invested. But this metaphor is not like an ecosystem. If it were an ecosystem, it'd be a wetland with water flowing, not controlled and channelized into pipes. And this was the problem with so many of these laws, is basically what they impose on us is a system of control. We have to put so many things in place to control the movement of money. And most of these things, most of these regulations, just to kind of break them down, they come into play anytime money moves in a particular way, particularly when we set some expectations about how that money is going to move and where it's going to go next. And the list goes on, by the way. This is maybe the list of laws that we came into contact with the most. But, just to look at a few of them, like if you're going to take investment from one party and then turn around and invest it in another enterprise, there's this thing called the Investment Company Act. If you're going to receive money from one person, not to then invest it, but just to transmit it to another person, then money transmission laws come into effect, and the anti-money laundering laws. These laws are so overwhelming. And so clients would come to us with very natural ideas of like, well, we're going to set up this cooperative to support local food enterprise, and we're going to help facilitate the transaction between the producer and the consumer. And we're also going to make it easy for everyday people to put their money in, and then they can invest. And then I would tell people, oh, well, I should talk to you about money transmission laws, investment company laws, finance lender laws, securities laws. And, it was too much. It was too much. But so this just gives you a taste. And like I said, the list goes on. At some point, maybe around 2017, Sustainable Economies Law Center thought, well, we're going to figure this out. We're going to just map it out. Let's map out all the different kinds of ways that money moves. Let's also map out all the categories of law that governs that. And we thought, if we just make this map, then we're going to figure out where the biggest pain points are. We're going to figure out then where our leverage points are. We thought, okay, this is going to help us determine one or two key leverage points. And all we got to do is maybe change that law and change that law. And then it's going to open up this floodgate of capital. But no, I really felt like what we discovered is this massive tangled up mess of laws, each one of which really needs to change. I mean, we can't just change one here and expect that the whole system is going to be transformed. They all need to change. They're all built on some fundamentally flawed assumptions and visions for the world. We did at the time draft this report and made some general recommendations, kind of some principles for untangling these laws, which I think is still helpful, but I'm not at all optimistic, because the purpose of these laws overall, in theory, is to protect us, everyday people, from them, the big financial institutions who have a major incentive to squeeze us and defraud us and take our money or mislead us, all of these things. And so the laws are supposed to protect us from them. So that's good, right? So why shouldn't we want to just comply with these laws? Well, can we build financial institutions, investment funds, and other such things that replace these more extractive ones without becoming those extractive institutions? I don't think so. And here's why. Just to understand some of the principles of these laws in general, what they require us to do is control things, because they all require us to demonstrate, and us, they require organizations or investment funds or whatever, financial institutions, to demonstrate that they can control the flow of money moving now and in the future. How do you control things that are going to happen in the future? You have to control people, places, and things. You have to control assets. You have to control people's labor. You have to make sure that a business model is going to make people want to show up and cough up dollars to pay for a particular thing. It's a system of control, and you must have tools to demonstrate that you can control things. And Specifically, like, the control and the system of oppression aside, just technically speaking, to comply with these laws, generally you need a ton of money at the outset. Sometimes you literally just, there's application fees, you have to have assets on your books to secure your activities, but you also need to hire lawyers and CPAs. It's almost unavoidable. Although for a long time we were like, you could do it yourself. Here, let us teach you. I don't know. Not really. There's just so much you need to learn. I mean, yeah, people can do it themselves. You have to become an expert if you're going to do it yourself. And then there's all these kind of specialized service providers that you need, including, payment processors and such things. And just to give an example of one we discovered when we were helping prepare documents to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission, we learned about Edgar. Edgar is the computer system that the SEC uses that somehow was maybe built in the dinosaur age. I don't know, but you need to hire a special service called an Edgarization service just to transform whatever you may have, like a PDF, into this, I don't know, XML, blah, blah, blah format that the SEC's Edgar platform uses. You have to hire and pay a service to do this, or we tried on our own. It's almost impossible to do. And so the organizations, they also need to just establish bureaucracy to manage all kinds of paperwork, record keeping, and communications. And then because of these laws, you have to use a lot of language that's just intimidating to everyday people. And then often some of these laws actually require the financial service providers to act like police. Like we've seen payment processors withhold and impound money just because they think there's something suspicious going on. So financial service providers have been now kind of obligated by the government to act like police, to take people's assets, impound them based on their own analysis of what looks suspicious. So there's that, acting like police. But overall, in general, you have to rely on police. Because let's say financial or a loan fund makes a loan for real estate, and they use a deed of trust, mortgage, whatever, to secure that loan with the real estate that's going to be purchased. Well, what happens if the borrower can't pay it back? Well, I guess you foreclose on the real estate. But what if people are living in the real estate? How do you get the real estate back and free it up? Well, you go to courts. What do courts do? Courts call the police. Ultimately, all of this is enforced by police, i.e., use of force and violence. And big picture, all of this leads us to question our own sanity, because there's a way in which these laws are inviting, in the sense of saying, these laws apply equally to everything and everyone. Here, come on in. You're invited to use and comply with these laws too. But then you come in and you realize you can't. And then there's just so many different ways in which we've had to question ourselves over and over again. And each time we hit a wall. So now what's happening now is I'm starting to talk about this to basically say there's no way out of this maze using financial regulation. But meanwhile, there's a lot of people who still work in this field. Maybe they administer investment funds, maybe they're securities lawyers or financial advisors, or all kinds of people are still working in this field. And they tend to show up, see, this is how I used to sound, with this very confident voice, very optimistic voice of like, well, we figured out how to do some kind of integrated capital stack and we're doing the regulatory compliance work. First of all, they use all these words that, they're a little bit alienating because these are not words people use on an everyday basis. I don't know, for whatever reason, capital stack, every time I hear it, I'm like, oh God. But they're often making promises. The people who are still working in this realm are saying, oh, we're about to launch this thing, or this thing is about to grow, or it's just around the corner. I kind of feel like this whole thing has been about to launch for 15 years. At some point, you just got to question, is there a there? Is this actually going to happen? So this is cautionary note is, I don't think you could actually necessarily trust the people who are still working in this realm to give you a very good idea of whether this stuff is possible, because their careers are built on believing that this stuff is possible. And I did. We worked on all of these great projects at Sustainable Economies Law Center. We're still working on them in many ways. Unlocking retirement savings, learning all about 401k law, learning all about the laws governing private foundations so we can tap those assets, like helping people do, say, federal Regulation A crowdfunding offerings that allow them to take capital from everyday people across the 50 states, understanding, explaining finance lender laws so those funds can then turn around and make loans out to the community. We were working on so many different parts of this. We also saw some policies like maybe let's create tax credits for local investment, and that will incentivize the money to flow. So in many ways, like it made sense that we were so optimistic because I could kind of step back and see all of this coming together, but I can't really call it an ecosystem anymore. I mean, it really was like a machine. We were trying to build a machine, mechanize, automatize financial justice. And now I'm just like, what did I learn here? Can we take all these things away for a minute and just ask ourselves, like, what's important here? What are we trying to build? Just remind ourselves, what are we trying to build? And just realize there are so many different ways to resource and support these infinitely diverse local enterprises. And I'm not going to give answers today because I actually think there's infinite answers, and that we really just kind of need to listen to our hearts, get to know what's happening locally. And I think that we'll intuit what needs to happen for these things to be supported. But in general, I'm looking back at a lot of the work we've done, and it's valuable. There's a lot of value here. I just don't think it's valuable in the current form or in the form that we were trying to have it take. So I'm not pouring ice cream in a shark machine exactly, but like my metaphor here is to kind of compost the work that we've been doing, because there is a lot of value that can kind of go back into the movement, back into the soil, growing mushrooms all over it here. And that's what I hope to be doing. And that's part of why I'm making this video, is to share some of that story and some of what I've learned. But my ultimate lesson is we need to stop thinking like machines. We need to stop building machines of control that control people, that control each other, and listen to ecosystems, learn from real ecosystems. And I think that's going to give us the answer.